The first thing I remember about that night was the wind. It wasn't the usual winter breeze that made the trees sway. It was a deep, howling wind, rattling the cabin windows and shaking the snow-covered pines. It sounded almost alive, like it was whispering through the cracks in the wood. I was 10 years old, spending winter break with my family in our remote vacation cabin deep in the mountains. My older brother, Ethan, was 13. We had been coming here since I was little, but something about this trip felt different. The first few days were normal, too normal. The snow was heavier than usual, muting all sound except for the occasional creak of the trees. The sky remained a constant steel-gray color, making it impossible to tell what time of day it was. The worst part? No animals, no birds, no deer, not even the occasional rabbit tracks in the snow. Like the entire forest was holding its breath. That evening, the storm was already starting to roll in when Ethan suggested playing outside. We bundled up in thick coats, ignoring our parents' warnings about the cold, and ran into the yard to play hide and seek. Ethan counted first. I ran into the woods, my boots crunching in the frozen snow. My breath came out in sharp white clouds. I'd always been afraid of going too deep into the trees, but that night, something pushed me forward. I needed to find the perfect hiding spot. Then I saw it, a house, but not our cabin. It stood alone in the trees, barely visible through the falling snow. The windows were dark. The front porch sagged under the weight of the ice. The entire place looked wrong, like it had been abandoned for years. I had never noticed it before. A chill ran down my spine. Then I heard the snap of a branch behind me. I turned. Ethan was gone. The yard was empty. The snow stretched out untouched, like no one had ever been there. My stomach twisted. Ethan, silence. Then a voice, soft, too soft. "Are you looking for someone?" I spun around. A woman stood, just a few feet away, wrapped in a heavy black coat. She had appeared out of nowhere. I should have screamed. I should have run, but something about her froze me in place. Her face was too pale, lips barely moving as she spoke. Her eyes were hidden under the shadow of her hood, but I could feel her staring. "I saw your brother," she said. "He went that way." She pointed toward the house. I opened my mouth to respond, but I saw something move behind the upstairs window, a dark figure. It stood perfectly still, half hidden in the shadows, watching us. I stepped back. My legs were shaking. "Who lives there?" I whispered. The woman tilted her head. Then, in a voice that barely rose above the wind, she said, "They do." I turned and ran. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I bolted through the snow, lungs burning, my boots slipping on the ice. I burst through the cabin door, gasping for air. Ethan was sitting at the table, perfectly fine. I froze. "Where were you?" He frowned. "Looking for you. I never left the yard." My parents looked up from their dinner, confused. "What's wrong?" I spun to the window. The trees outside stood still. The snow fell in peaceful silence. The woman was gone. I told them everything, the house, the woman, the figure in the window. Ethan shook his head. "I didn't see any house." My dad's face darkened. "That house you're talking about? That cabin at the end of the trail?" I nodded quickly. He hesitated. "The family that owns it," he said slowly, "is out of town for the winter." The air in the room felt heavy. That night, my parents called the local sheriff. He came by the next morning to check it out, but the house was empty. No footprints, no signs of life, no indication that anyone had been there for years. But I know what I saw. Someone was there watching, and whoever they weren't supposed to be. There's something eerie about being deep in the mountains in the middle of winter. The way the snow swallows sound, the way the cold air stings your skin, it makes you feel completely isolated, like the world beyond the peaks doesn't exist. That was the last thing on our minds when we arrived at the ski resort. It was supposed to be a dream trip. Me, my 3 college buddies, and a whole week of skiing, partying, and living it up in the snow. We had spent months planning it, scraping together money, and now we were finally here. The resort was beautiful but expensive, so we stuck to the cheaper public trails. That was fine with us, at least until we met them. 2 women. They approached us on the 3rd night at the lodge bar. Tall, beautiful, and dressed like they belonged on a magazine cover. One blonde, one brunette. They bought us drinks, laughed at our jokes, and somewhere between our third and fourth round, they started talking about a secret ski trail, Devil's Forest. The blonde whispered, leaning in close. It's not on the map, only locals know about it. I glanced at my friends. It was our first time here. We weren't locals. The brunette smirked, reading my hesitation. It's safe. Just off the grid. It was stupid. We knew better. But the idea of skiing somewhere exclusive, somewhere private, it was tempting. So the next morning we followed them. The trail was deep in the woods, far from the main slopes. The snow was untouched, the trees towering like silent watchers. It was too quiet. Something felt off. But my friends were too distracted, laughing, taking videos, messing around. We reached a clearing where the two women pulled out a flask and passed it around. That's when things started going wrong. At first it was small. My friends got sluggish, their words slurring. The cold air felt heavier. I took a sip, but something in the back of my mind screamed, "Don't." So I only pretended to drink. Within minutes, 3 of my friends were on the ground. "Dude, I feel weird," Jason mumbled, blinking slowly. "I can't stand up," Mike slurred, eyes unfocused. I turned to the women. They weren't laughing anymore. They were watching, smirking. Then, without a word, they stood up, grabbed our bags, our expensive ski gear, and walked away. My stomach dropped. I followed them, stumbling at first, then running. They weren't alone. Parked just beyond the trees was a black van, and beside it, 3 men, waiting. One of them looked right at me and smiled. Something inside me snapped. I turned and ran back to my friends. They were still groggy, barely able to move. We had been set up. I grabbed Jason by the jacket. "Get up! Get up!" I shook him, adrenaline pumping through my veins. "We need to go! Now!" He groaned, but I forced him to his feet. Mike and Daniel were barely conscious. I didn't care. I dragged them through the snow, every second expecting to hear footsteps behind me, but the footsteps never came. By the time we reached the main resort, my heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The women gone, the men gone, and when we reported it to security, no one had seen them. The Devil's Forest Trail didn't exist. No records, no maps, like it had been wiped clean. I don't know what would have happened if I had actually drunk from that flask, but I have. A feeling we were never meant to make it back. There's something unsettling about frozen lakes at night. During the day, they're beautiful, endless stretches of white and blue, reflecting the sky like glass. But when the sun goes down, they become something else entirely. Dark, silent, hollow, like if you stood there long enough, the ice might just swallow you whole. It was a tradition for me and my 3 closest friends, Nick, Brian, and Jordan. Every winter, we hiked out to a remote frozen lake, far from town, where no one else ever went. No streetlights, no houses, no noise, except for the occasional distant crack of ice shifting beneath the surface. It was peaceful, at least it had been, until last year. Last year, we saw him. We arrived around 11 p.m., the cold biting at our faces. The sky was overcast, making the world feel smaller, like we were completely cut off from reality. We walked to the center of the ice, the surface stretching out endlessly in all directions. The only light came from our flashlights and the dull reflection of the moon behind the clouds. For a while, everything was normal. We laughed. We talked about life. We threw rocks across the ice, listening to the eerie pinging sounds they made as they skipped over the surface. Then Brian stopped. "There's someone out there." At first, we didn't see it. But then, a shape moved at the edge of the ice, dark, hunched, dragging something behind it. I squinted against the darkness. A bear! But as the figure stood up, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a bear, it was a man in a bear suit. He was wearing an old, oversized bear costume, the kind you'd see at a rundown amusement park. The fur was matted, dirty, and he was dragging something, a black bag, heavy, struggling against the ice. Every few feet he would stop, stomp on the ice, and then keep pulling, like he was trying to break through. A sick feeling crept into my stomach. "What the hell is he doing?" Nick pulled out his phone. "I'm taking a video." The second his flashlight hit the ice, the man froze. For a long, unbearable moment, he stood completely still. Then, he turned to face us. The bear mask covered most of his face, but we could see his mouth. He was smiling, and then slowly he started walking toward us. At first, none of us moved. It was like our brains couldn't process what was happening. Then Jordan whispered, "We need to go." We turned and started walking back, fast. But Brian, he wouldn't move. He just stood there, frozen, whispering, "That bag is big enough to fit a—" "Don't!" I grabbed his arm and yanked him backward. "We need to go, now!" The bear-suited man picked up speed, not running, but walking faster, like he knew we wouldn't make it off the ice in time. I grabbed Nick, pushing him toward the trees. The ice creaked under our weight. My heart pounded as I pictured it. Us falling through, the freezing water dragging us down. We reached the edge, just as he stepped onto the lake. I turned back one last time. The man had stopped again, but he wasn't looking at us anymore. He was staring down at the bag. Then, in one sharp motion, he kicked it into the ice. Crack! The ice split open. The bag sank. Without another word, the man in the bear suit walked into the trees and disappeared. We ran all the way back to the car, slipping on ice, gasping for breath. No one spoke. No one looked back. When we finally locked the doors and sat in silence, reality hit us all at once. "What the hell was that?" Jordan whispered. Brian was shaking. "That bag, there was something in it." We reported everything to the police. We told them about the man, the bag, the ice breaking. They searched the lake. They checked the woods. They found nothing. No footprints. No drag marks. No signs that anyone had ever been there. And then, a few days later, we saw a news report. A child had gone missing in our town, last seen near the woods. None of us said it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. Had we just witnessed someone disposing of a body, or was it something even worse? I never went back to that lake. But sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear it. The ice cracking and something sinking into the dark.